Print servers in federal environments create risk and unnecessary complexity. Every new printer, location, or policy adds strain to infrastructure that was never built for today's demands. FedRAMP High Authorized Printer Logic eliminates print servers with a secure cloud-native, zero-trust solution designed for federal IT. With advanced security, centralized control, and simplified management, agencies can modernize print without added burden. See what secure serverless printing looks like. Visit Vasion.com to learn more.
Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Small Business Administration is trying to open the federal contracting door to more small businesses. In a proposed rule issued last week, SBA is updating the small business size standards that would make more than 114,000 companies eligible for small business contracts. For more on what SBA is proposing and the initial reaction from the small business community, Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller, joins me now. Jason, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Terry.
So SBA's proposed changes would add 114,000 companies into the small business category. How exactly would that work?
As one small business lawyer told me, this is a shock to the system. This is not just a small change. This is a major rethinking of how the small business community would work and how the small business size standards would apply to, as you said, Terry, more than 110,000 new companies. Now, what SBA did was they took a two-step approach. First, they looked at all the current size standards, which, let's look at this. They haven't been updated since 2022, and that was just for inflation by itself. So it's been almost 4 years, and every 5 years, the Small Business Act requires the Small Business Administration to update these size standards. And that makes sense. A lot of times they're done just because of inflation, because as inflation changes, obviously they want more updates as things get more expensive or hopefully cheaper. But one of the things that the SBA did was they looked at all the ones that are revenue based. And many say to be considered a small business, you have to have revenues under this much over the last so many years. And then they looked at the ones that are employee-based. If your company has more than X amount of employees, you're no longer considered small. And the goal there is just to look at the industry sectors and level the playing field. And what SBA did, and this is fascinating, is not only did they increase the revenue-based size standards, they also increased the employee-based size standards and then moved some that used to be revenue-based, right, into the employee-based. So they really did take all these size standards and shake them up, and they came out in a much different looking way. And let me just give you a couple quick examples because I thought this was fascinating. One big example, and this is one of the biggest increases, they talk about media streaming, social networks, and other media networks. If you're playing by the NAICS codes at home, right, it's 5162. That's also a big change. They went from a 6-digit NAICS code to a 4-digit NAICS code. But the old size standard for considered small was $47 million. Under this proposed rule, the new one would be $970 million. So a $923 million increase for the small business. There's so many like that across the board. I mean, Terry, one of the most popular ones that we see with the small businesses is the ones under technology, computer programming, computer services. And the example there I'd like to point out is it used to be 34 million, and now it's 531 million. So a small business in the computer world, so it's a common NAICS code that a lot of the contracts are put at, would increase by something like 500%, so some huge amount. And I think what this is doing is really saying, the SBA is saying a couple things from this. Number one, they're saying, hey, the way this has been done before hasn't been keeping up. And second, they're trying to address a longstanding complaint in the small business community that said, because the NAICS codes have not been increased, the size standards have not been increased over the last several years and has not kept up in anything but really inflation, a lot of small businesses are exiting the market. And SBA is really trying to say, hey, we want to keep small businesses in the market longer. And as we look at the bigger industrial complex, small businesses, what they were 10, 15, 20 years ago, doesn't mean the same thing as they are today.
There's a lot to unpack there, and folks will have to parse those rules pretty closely. But they also changed the methodology for how to decide whether a size standard needs to be increased. So what did they do there?
The good news is they said almost all of them had to be increased. And the ones that didn't, I think something to the effect of like 45 or so, they didn't change those at all. They didn't decrease anything. But what they did was the methodology they updated. And the last time the methodology was changed was in 2024 during the Biden administration. And this administration obviously feels like that change did not really reflect how size standards should be looked at. So one of the things they did, and this is, again, another proposed rule that people can comment on, and they can say, first, they looked at the total size of all participants in that industry group or industry. That includes for-profit businesses, nonprofit entities, and government-owned entities. The second, they looked at distinct geographical markets in which the competition takes place. And finally, the adjustment for imports and exports to account for international competition faced by domestic firms. So this was a whole different change and approach to this methodology. And again, Terry, this is a proposed rule, not final, so things will be changed. And one of the things I've heard, and this is what's really interesting about what SBA decided to do, was they released both the new methodology and the new size standards at the same time. And from the folks I've talked to, someone like John Shiraka, a former SBA official who ran the government contracting office for SBA several years ago, he goes, that just is not done. We have not seen that ever done before. Usually it's done in a step by step. Usually the methodology is released and they get comments and then they make updates. Then they release maybe the first set of changes, maybe for services, and then maybe they do products, or they do employee-based and then revenue-based. But to do it at the same time, he goes, that has also shaken up the system.
So what else are you hearing from the small business contracting experts? Was it a good idea to do them both together, or do they have other concerns about the rules and the methodology here?
That is one of the major concerns, that SBA made all these changes at once and changed the methodology at once. And if you think about it, what tends to happen, and this is what happened during the Biden administration, they changed the methodology, then they put out a proposed rule for the changes to the revenue-based size standards. Now, that proposed rule never got out of proposal. It never got to final, and they never got to the point where they put out a change to the employee-based size standard. So again, both of those were on tap to be updated, but never got through the entire process. So the fact they put them out together is odd and surprising. The second bigger thing here is they've limited this to a 30-day comment period. And I think we'll talk about this in a second, but that's also a big concern. That's a really short amount of time. And Terry, this was released last Tuesday, so about a week ago. And already the two proposed rules have received limited comments, 10 for small business methodology and about 65 as of today for the small business proposed size standard changes. At the same time, what the SBA also did that kind of was a little bit of a red flag for folks I've talked to, John Shiraka, I also talked to Eric Crucius, a procurement lawyer with Hutton, Andrews, and Kurth, is that they're estimating the number of new small businesses that would enter that market. And at least John Shiraka believes that's way underestimated. So, for instance, they looked at, again, I talked about the computer services, the programming one. They believe this would only add about 1,300 more small businesses to the market. And John Shiraka said that may be nice. That may be true in some ways. But think about all those people who said, I'm not going to enter the federal market because it's too complicated. It's too much going on. But wait a minute. Now I can be a small business. Now I can be eligible for set-asides. Now I could take advantage of all those things that the government does for small businesses. Maybe I will enter the market. And the concern is that they'll flood the market and the competition will be, much more steep. And whether or not the administration raises the small business goals, or does Congress raise the small business goals, given now you have 114,000 more small businesses entering the market. So those are some of the concerns. I think the last one I'll just mention real quick is when you make size standards that large, right? When you go from 50 million to 450 million as an example for one of them, the concern here is that's not going to just bring in more companies. It's really going to flood the market with current ones that are considered medium-sized businesses. And while some people like Amani Augustus, who is the director of the Center for Entrepreneurial Opportunity at Third Way, which is a DC-based think tank, says that's been a big problem for a long time, the mid-sized companies. I'm not sure the answer is to flood them into the small business market. I think the answer is to figure out ways to ensure that there's fair competition and that the playing field is as level as possible.
Jason, you mentioned a 30-day comment period. Fill us in on the details of the timeline here.
Comments are due back to the SBA for both of these proposed rules by September 21st. So time is ticking. People should get their comments in. This is really important, I think, to comment, both positively, negative, what's in there, what's not in there, what's missing, what did SBA not think of. I think that's really been an encouragement from people like Eric Crucius, the lawyer that I talked to, or John Shiraka, or others in the community. More specifically about the proposed methodology change, SBA is asking for 6 specific questions that they want answered about their change. So I think folks should really focus on that methodology change and how they're going about it. Because again, this is what will drive changes in the future. Now, yes, a new SBA could come in, and yes, they could, under a new administration, change that methodology again. But I think generally speaking, I think SBA likes to keep their methodology intact because it takes a lot to change it, but also has a big downward effect. And then the other thing I think we look out for is congressional interest in this. Right now, I've not heard any letters. I've not seen any hearings scheduled. But I think as the small business community says, hey, this is great or this is not great, and whatever reaction they give you, that will get Congress involved, especially when you're seeing such huge increases in those size standards. Again, I'll just go back to the computer science and computer services one. It went from 34 million to 531 million, Terry. If it went from 34 million to 100 million, okay, people could say, okay, we're all in the same body of water. But a $450 million company is much bigger than a $50 million company competing in that body of water. And I think that could drive a lot of congressional interest. And hey, I'm a small business. I can't compete with such a large business, even though they are no longer considered large under this proposed rule. So I think that further reaction is going to be also what's really going to be interesting to watch.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. Jason, thanks for bringing us this story. Certainly a lot to watch over the next few weeks.
Always fun in the small business world. Thank you, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.